Let me begin with a quick overview of the IAPG while we allow for time for some late arrivals to connect. We're a Houston-based nonprofit organization that shares in the principles of our sister organization, the Buenos Aires Instituto Argentino del Petróleo y del Gas. We're led by a team of 20 directors, all of us volunteers. We organize virtual events such as this webinar, in-person conferences, and networking opportunities. The funds we raise from our very generous sponsors, some of whom you see on the right, will go towards our scholarship programs, which provide funding for Argentine professionals interested in pursuing graduate degrees in energy. We are proud to have over 20 scholars we have sponsored by way of our own Claudio Manzolillo program, as well as via our cooperation agreement with the Fulbright US student program. We wanted to make sure you were aware of our upcoming in-person Shale in Argentina event that will be held in Houston on September 12th. It will be a full-day event that will provide a deep dive into Argentina's unconventional oil and gas resources, and will include presentations by senior government authorities, as well as by executives from YPF and other key players in each of the upstream, midstream, and oil field services sectors. Visit our website if you're interested in attending and or sponsoring. Argentina has been in the news lately, not only for having won the Copa America, but also for some very welcome changes in policy aimed at attracting much needed private investment. In particular, the Ley de Bases was recently approved by both the upper and lower chambers of the legislature. We are pleased to have jointly assembled this webinar with Nicholson and Cano, Abogados, a leading full-service law firm based in Buenos Aires. Founded in 1976, it offers a team of 29 partners and over 150 lawyers to advise its clients on legal issues. Now let me introduce today's speakers. I introduced myself at the onset of today's event, but in case you arrived late, my name is Joe Amador. I'm an investment banker and vice president of the IAPG Houston. I'm very pleased to be one of today's moderators. Mariana Guzian is a lawyer with a master's in finance. She is currently partner in Nicholson y Cano Abogados and our co-moderator for today. She's the co-head of their energy and natural gas resource practice, and also has extensive experience in corporate law and mergers and acquisitions. She has been involved in many of the most significant transactions in the energy sector within the firm over the past decade. Esteban Olivera is an economist and managing partner of Phoenix Partners, a Buenos Aires-based boutique investment bank. His expertise is in mergers and acquisitions, where he has participated in numerous energy-related transactions involving both local and international clients. He is also on the boards of various companies, but what is most interesting is that he is also an owner of Bodegas Chacana, with vineyards and wineries in the province of Mendoza. Francisco Villamil is an industrial engineer and is currently executive trading manager at publicly traded Vista Energy. The company has assets in Argentina and Mexico. It has proved reserves of over 300 million barrels of oil equivalent, BOE, production of over 65,000 BOE per day, and a market cap of about $4 billion US. Frank has worked in business development and commercial roles in several local companies, including YPF, as well as international players such as Oxy and Agreco, which offers temporary power solutions. Tomas Chevallier is a lawyer and currently legal affairs manager at privately held Plus Petrol. The company has proved reserves of over 600 million BOE and operates over 400,000 BOE per day in 7 countries located in 3 continents. It has recently also ventured into lithium mining. Tomas is a lawyer and has worked at local and international law firms, including Norton, Warrows, Fulbright. He was also legal counsel at YPF. So quite a well-qualified team. Thank you all for sharing your time. Some logistics for today. We're recording this event, so please be cognizant of that. The recording will be made available shortly, and we will send you a link once the video has been uploaded. Each presenter will speak for about 10 minutes. Then we will open the floor for questions. You can submit your questions in writing via the Q&A function located at the bottom of your screen. Whatever you submit via this function can be viewed only by the panelists and moderators, so you will be provided some degree of anonymity. Note that the opinions expressed by today's presenters are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of their employers or the IAPG Houston. Let's begin with my co-moderator, Mariana, who will provide an overview of the Ley de Bases. Adelante, Mariana.
Thanks, Joe. Let me share my screen. I think you can see it there. So I want to thank all of the speakers and our audience on both sides of the Atlantic for joining us today. We want to cover a lot in the next hour, so let's just dive into it. I first wanted to give, can you see it? Yeah. I first wanted to give a high-level overview of the large investments incentive regime that was enacted through the so-called Ley de Bases or Bases law. The full name is Bases and Starting Points for the Freedom of the Argentinians law, which is quite a mouthful. You'll see the incentive regime referred to everywhere as RIGI. That's the acronym for the Spanish Regimen de Incentivos para las Grandes Inversiones. I should mention that there are several aspects of the law that still need to be further regulated. So we're waiting for the President and for the Secretariat of Energy to issue the decrees and the resolutions that will provide further detail and regulation on all of these matters. Well, the RIGI's purpose is to incentivize investments and promote the economic development of Argentina, of course, but also to provide certainty and legal security to those projects that qualify under the RIGI. The RIGI applies to projects within specific sectors, as you can see on the slide, and those sectors include energy, hydrocarbons, and infrastructure. We'll see that the RIGI has not been designed with upstream investments in mind. These still have access to the benefits of Decree 929 from 2013 and Law 27007. Those are still in force. And if you recall, those to qualify, those projects require a minimum investment of $250 million over the course of 3 years. But focusing on the RIGI, the main requirements for a project to qualify under it are, first, it has to belong to one of these sectors that I just mentioned. Second, it has to be channeled through a special purpose vehicle, and the law provides for several alternatives to comply with this SPV requirement. Number three, it has to involve the acquisition, production, construction, or development of assets. Number four is that, as a general rule, the minimum investment commitment is at least $200 million. And of that amount, at least 40% has to be invested within the first 2 years of the project. But there are certain exceptions to this general rule. For instance, depending on the project, the regulation may raise the minimum commitment to up to $900 million. And also the characteristics of the project may come into play when allocating this 40% within those first 2 years. So it's not going to be necessarily split in half. The regulation may also further reduce that 40% and bring it down to 20. So there's flexibility built in within the law to allow for some changes based on the needs of the project. There's also a subcategory, so to speak, which is the long-term strategic export projects. Those have a minimum ticket of $1 billion. And these are projects that may result in positioning Argentina as a new long-term supplier of global markets where it's not currently present. And of course, what comes to mind is the LNG projects that you've seen all over the press and all over the news, which would absolutely qualify as this type of strategic investment. Last but not least, the projects have to be long-term projects. There's a formula that you can see here on the slide, which is basically the result of dividing the present value of the net cash flow of the first 3 years, excluding investments, divided by the net present value of the investments plans for that same period has to be below 30% to qualify. Timing is of the essence here. The projects have to be submitted for approval within 2 years counted as from the enactment of the law. So the clock is already ticking. The regulations may come into play and extend that 2-year term to 1 year, but we still are have to wait and see. And given the 2-year window for investing that 40% of the capital, this project should also be pretty advanced on permitting. So that's something also to be considered. In terms of suppliers and vendors, they can also request to be registered under the RIGI and will access certain tax benefits in connections with goods and services that will be used in turn by the SPV whose project has qualified under the RIGI. One of the last-minute changes to the law prior to being passed in Congress was the incorporation of the commitment to hire local suppliers and vendors for up to 20% of the budget for suppliers and vendors, as long as they're available, excuse me, and their price and quality are market standard. I'm sorry. Apologies. Income tax, these are the benefits. Sorry. Income tax, major benefit under the RIGI, the reduction of the corporate tax rate from 35% to 25%, and the tax on dividends is reduced to 3.5% after 7 years. We have accelerated depreciation. Tax losses can be carried forward indefinitely to offset against future taxable profits without limitation. This can be adjusted by inflation. They are assignable to third parties, so many things that the current regulations don't have. No withholding on foreign technical services, on value-added tax. They can be paid by, thank you, credit certificates issued by the government. 100% of the tax on bank accounts, credits, and debits can be used against income tax. Imports and exports. There's freedom for import and exporting. There's exemption on import duties and exemption on export duties starting on year 3 for the strategic, and the $1 billion project is starting on one year after the start of the project. Foreign exchange, there's 100% free availability of the export proceeds started on year 4 for the general projects and started on year 3 for the strategic projects. There's free access to foreign exchange markets, which is something that is currently very highly regulated. Anybody familiar with Argentina knows this. And as long as the SPV has entered the dollars into the market for an equivalent amount. Should the FX restrictions that are currently in place as a general rule be lifted, then all of these projects will also benefit from the more favorable resolutions and rules. These projects will enjoy regulatory stability for tax, customs, and exchange matters for 30 years, and for strategic projects, that 30-year term counts as from each stage or phase of the project, but with a cap of 40 years. Lastly, these projects will have direct access directly to international arbitration for claims against the national state, which is also a very important matter for investors. And there's no need to finish the local procedures, the local administrative procedures prior to filing the administrative claim. So that's very quick overview of the RIGI. And then I want to move on to the changes introduced in the hydrocarbons law. Tomas will also be commenting on this, but just to give you an idea, one significant change is the shift from the prioritization of the self-supply to a free market scheme. The shift has many points of impact throughout the legislation. One of the more important ones being the acknowledgement of the producer's right to dispose of the hydrocarbons as they see fit, including the freedom to export and the freedom to set prices so they can maximize the revenue from the exploitation of the resources. The obligation to maintain reserves to meet Argentina's needs has been eliminated. So these are very important changes within how the market is is ruled. In connection with the concessions and important deadlines, conversion of conventional concessions to unconventional concessions can be requested until December 31st, 2028. Upon approval of the conversion, the term of the converted concession shall be 35 years. New concessions, also an important change, can be granted for a maximum term of 35 years with a potential 10-year extension. That is something that has to be included in the bidding document, but there's no more than one extension of up to 10 years. The existing concessions shall be governed by the existing terms and conditions, and this has been a little bit of a point of contention, and Tomas will comment on this later on as well. Transportation, anyone can request a transportation authorization. These are no longer called concessions. The authorizations have no expiration date. If there's any excess transportation capacity after meeting the needs of the transporter, it shall be subject to open access. In the case of processing, at least 5% of the processing capacity has to be allocated to third parties. This does not apply under certain situations, including the LNG project. In connection with exports, and I finished with this, there's no need to request a prior authorization, but the intended exports have to be submitted to the Secretariat of Energy, who has a 30-day term to object to the export. And in the case of LNG, there's a special provision in the natural gas law that does require that a prior authorization is obtained within 120 days, but once that is obtained, those authorizations will be firm for up to 30 years without ensuring the right to export continuously without interruptions, reductions, and to access the hydrocarbon, the transport, and the storage. So as you can tell, this has been a very high level and quick summary of what we consider the highlights of the law. So back to you, Joe.
Great, gracias, Mariana, for your overview. You have a summary of the key points of the new law at your website. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Let me share with you. You can find them. This is our website, nicholsonicano.com.ar for Argentina. There's a legal alerts tab there that you can enter, and you will see a summary of all of the aspects of the basis law, as well as other client alerts that are of interest to the general public.
And they're in English and Spanish?
Both, correct.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Well, great. Thanks again, Mariana. Argentina's macroeconomic environment is improving, but it still has a ways to go. Esteban, maybe you could talk about how you see the law affecting the country's macroeconomic climate in general.
Sure, Joe. Well, before that, I wanted to give a background on why do we need in Argentina a Ley de Bases. So this is the main reason why we need the Ley de Bases. So this graph starts in 1900s up to 2024. And as you can see here, Argentina has not been behaving well on the fiscal accounts. So you can see there were only 3 governments in the last 120 years that had a surplus, a fiscal surplus. What's the consequence of that? As you can see, we had defaulted our sovereign debt 7 times in our last 120 years, starting in 1951 up to the one in 2020 by Alberto Fernandez. Then you have the age, which means high inflation. Hyperinflation would be two times, but we had a high inflation periods in other times in history, and we were starting a very high one at the end of the government of Alberto Fernandez. So what's the consequence of these 120 years? We are not a reliable country. And that means that for Argentina, it's very difficult to attract long-term capital for capital-intensive industries. Therefore, the government realized this and decided to present this law that thankfully has been voted by both chambers. So while they passed the law, they have also been doing some work where, as we can see in the next slide, this is a zoom in into the fiscal accounts of the last 3 governments. Macri reached a minimum at the end of his tenure, a primary fiscal surplus. Alberto Fernandez as well, when he enacted, this was because he enacted a few new taxes. Then he ran into deficit again, which started the high inflation period. When the new president came, that this is the first time probably in our history where the president himself is the one very committed to a fiscal equilibrium. So this is what happened with Milei. We are running for the 3rd time in the last 120 years a fiscal surplus, both primary and after debt service. This is helping the inflation to come down and the foreign reserves to bounce back. So that was the background. This is the environment where the basis law come into place to help attract capital for long-term investments. And last but not least, is a quick overview what we believe as a structural change for the future. Argentina, and I would say this is a bit conservative, but Argentina has exported $1888 billion in 2022, and we expect, mainly because of the changes in the oil and gas industry and lithium, and I'm not taking into account other metals, other mining metals, such as copper, Argentina will change completely its export matrix, leading to a more stable midterm in the horizon, and not depending so much in the agriculture commodities. So that's mainly the background, the environment, and the midterm view for the basis laws. I think I'm passing now to Tomas, no?
Thanks, Esteban. That's a great summary, and definitely need for something like this to be enacted and to remain in effect for a long time. Tomas, tell us maybe the perspective of the upstream player, if you will.
You see the screen? So
we can see the screen and we can hear you.
Sure. Good morning. Good morning to everyone. Thanks for coming. And well, I'm going to take over some of Mariana's explanations regarding the changes to the hydrocarbons law, and I'm going to give the viewpoint from the upstream sector, from the in-house upstream sector, and comment on what we see from the upstream sector to what are these modifications going to do to our business. First, I'm going to talk about the duration of concessions. Mariana already explained that there is a change on the term of duration of the concessions. We see that this term is this change is limited because it does not affect the concessions that are already in force. I see a question there. It is asking us, well, what's the impact of existing investments or existing projects? Well, we see that in terms of the duration of concessions, it doesn't have a big impact because most of the acreage of Vaca Muerta is already concessioned. So there will be no huge impact on the concessions because the existing concessions will have the terms that will keep the terms that have already been granted, right? But we see as a positive change the aspects that are with regard to the midstream sector. Of course, I think that many of us are aware that we have a problem in Vaca Muerta with the infrastructure. We don't have enough infrastructure to evacuate or process all the hydrocarbons that we have in Vaca Muerta. So we need to expand our facilities, and the changes in the law are going in that direction. And they basically are aimed at attracting new investments in the midstream sector by changing the transport authorization. The concession authorization is changed to transport authorization, which allows new entry of new players that are not holders of concessions, of exploitation concessions. You may be aware that today you need to have an exploitation concession to have a transportation concession. After the enactment of this law, you can be a third party without an exploitation concession, and you can apply for a transportation authorization. That's a change. That's very important. That we expect new players to come in and invest in this sector that needs new investment. Also, the new law introduces the concept of processing that it was not included previously as a regulated activity, and it was included within the exploitation concession. So typically, processing was carried out by the exploitation concession operators. Most of the facilities were located within the concessions and were operated by the concessionaires. Well, now the law allows to third parties to request an authorization for the processing of hydrocarbons, and that we expect that probably will attract new investments in that sector as well. When we say processing, we understand, although we need to see what the regulation of this law says about processing and how it defines it. We understand that processing is it is crude processing, PTCs or plants of crude treatment or central processing facilities. Although it allows for the entry of new players, it also establishes 5% obligation of the owner of the facility to allow the entry to allocate it to third parties that want to use that facility. And then we have, and this is very important, the regulation of LNG. Mariana gave an overview of the RIGI, and although there is a discussion whether the RIGI will apply or not to the oil and gas existing investments or projects, we do understand that the fact that the RIGI applies to LNG projects and that the LNG projects have this special treatment in the law will allow for the opening of a new market or of new markets, right? What we need is new markets for our natural gas. We do have the natural gas. We need new markets. So if RIGI plus the modifications of the law allow for the construction of LNG facilities, then that's going to unlock our possibilities. Regardless of the RIGI for oil and gas, it will unlock new possibilities for us to produce more gas. And then regarding, I don't know how the time, Joe? Okay.
You're fine. You have 5 minutes.
All right, fine.
Yeah, thanks.
Duration of concessions. We already spoke about that, and then we have changing royalties. This is, in the new regime, the new bids will have a 50% base royalty, but then the bidder may then the bidder may offer a different rate, and this is positive for investors because it will allow investors to value the new blocks or the blocks they are bidding for according to what they understand the royalties should be. Today, we are, as you may know, the fixed royalty is 12%, with an increasing royalty upon the extensions of the concessions. And then in the export regime, Francisco is going to get some details about this and talk about this as well. But this is very positive as well because exports are now only subject to non-objection by the government. As you may know, today we have a different scheme where if we want to export, then we have to offer first our production to the internal market, and then if there is no calls for that production, then we can export. And now we have this new scheme. And then another important point is that we no longer have official prices for the internal sales. So as in an overall, we see this as a very positive piece of legislation. We believe and we expect that this will foster investment in the midstream sector. That is the sector that we most, that we need to develop. And also we believe that LNG plus RIGI will unlock possibilities to developing LNG, which will open markets for us.
Great, thanks, Tomas. Good overview, and a lot of optimism, but I think there's still a few questions out there. Francisco, how is this new law impacting the midstream players' growth plans, given that it looks like it will be at least incentivizing some upstream activity?
Okay, let me share something. Hello, everyone. Thanks, Joe, and the IAPG Houston for the invitation. I will try to speak about what can the Ley Bases do for the Argentina's oil production. For sure, there are some midstream concerns that we will review under this presentation. But in order to get there, I want to make a little bit of history on what happened in the past 10 years in Argentina regarding the oil production. If you see pre-pandemic phase, pandemic happened in 2020, it's where you get a little bit drop down there in the chart. The production in Argentina used to have a similar behavior, along the years. You have the heavy production coming from the Golfo de San Jorge. It's a mid-sweet production. It's Escalante and Cañadón Seco. It used to be 200,000 barrels a day of production, and that production keep on steady, until 2020. That's the gray one. And if you see the light blue one, that's the production coming from Neuquén, where Vaca Muerta is. And you can see that in 2016, perhaps, that curve became too darker, and that's because the shale came in, so we can see the first steps of the shale production coming in before pandemics. Pandemics were a nightmare. Esteban talked about the economy, and it took Argentina like almost 2 years to get again to the same levels of production. You see here in 2022 is when Argentina reached again 500,000 barrels a day of production. But when we reached that levels of production, there was something that had changed in the behavior of the basins. The shale oil production from Neuquén has become much more significant, and it's the one who is pushing the production in Argentina. And in the last 2 years, we can say that it started to boost. The actual levels of production in Argentina are 700,000 barrels a day. And of all of those, you have 370 coming from the shale oil production, and 100, they're still remaining from the conventional part of Neuquén. So the Neuquén Basin has become the largest play of oil production in Argentina. As you can see in the charts below, YPF is the largest producer in Argentina. Vista ourselves are the third one. We actually are producing 65,000 barrels a day. When we started our operations in 2018, we bought assets in Argentina that used to produce just 15,000 barrels a day of production, of conventional production. We spin off those assets in order to focus fully in becoming an unconventional and shale production player, and working hardly with the 3 dedicated rigs and a set and a frac set, we reached to these levels of production. Now, why did I told you this? In order to jump in order what could happen with Argentina and the shale production. For sure, we think that the shale is going to be a game changer for the country because of the impact that this could have to the economy in the country. If you see here, since 2017 up to 2022, the level of production of Argentina was around 500,000 barrels a day, that matched the local consumption. So all the growth since 2021 and onwards, it allowed Argentina to start exporting. This was a hard work to do because the Medanito production has not been in the market, in the international market, for at least 15 years, since the heavy decline affected the country. So there was a hard work put in place in order to build a solid export platform and let the Medanito reach to new markets. Nowadays, those main markets are the west coast of the United States, Brazil, Chile, and some of the barrels also go to Peru. Nowadays, we're struggling with the infrastructure in order to get to new markets, but we'll jump into that later. Here, Mariana and as well Tomas, they talked about the important changes that are happening in the regulation. The law still needs to be regulated, and there are some key points that they signed that are very important for us. It's like the free availability of the resources, and there must not be intervention on the prices. So those 2 things are quite significant importance for the development of Vaca Muerta. And here I would like to make a parallel with what happened in the US long time ago. In 2010, the US used to produce 5 million barrels of production a day. In 2014, Obama lifted the ban that was at that time in the US that do not allow the US producers to export their production. Once that was lifted, the production in the US boosted. It goes from 5 million barrels up to the actual 14 million barrels a day of production. So now the opportunity that we have in our hands, I think it's the same. It's if we get the correct regulation in place, we're going to see these projections or more. From our models, we can say that Argentina's production will reach by 2027 to around 1 million barrels. And onwards up to 2030, we can get Vaca Muerta to 1 million barrels. But now, how are we going to deliver that is, I think, one of the key things that we need to solve, that is the infrastructure in order to get those barrels flowing from the basin up to the markets. Last year, we started again the operations of the oleoducto Trasandino that delivers nowadays around 90,000 barrels a day of production to ENAP refineries in Chile. That was a big hit for the country because it gives us, consistently exports on a daily basis. The other thing that are happening are the expansions on the infrastructure for the barrels that goes to the Atlantic that are loaded in Puerto Rosales on the Bahía Blanca port. The first thing was the expansion of the main transportation system of Oldelval that will reach to 550,000 barrels a day, and it will be ready by the end of this year. And the second phase is going to be ready by first quarter next year. So on top of that, we're gonna be limited on capacity once we keep on growing our productions up to the 1 million barrels as a country, and we need new projects. And that's where the Vaca Muerta Sur pipeline project comes in. It's a project that it's supposed to be built up to Punta Colorada. And why Punta Colorada was selected? It's because it's a deep water port, so it will allow us to load larger vessels in order to get to new markets. As I told you before, nowadays, all the markets that the Medanito is reaching are on the region. But once we get the chance to load these very large crude carriers, we can easily get to the Asian market or even Europe. So that's one of the points. And the other one that perhaps it's sometimes people skip it, that it's closer, you know, Punta Colorada, it's closer to Bahía Blanca. So that's another very interesting thing in order to build the project up to there. And with that, I'm done, Joe.
Well, great, thanks, Francisco. Great overview and impressive growth potential that the country has. But none of this is possible without oil field service companies that are actually out there doing the work. You're going to need more rigs, more frac spreads. Esteban, if we could go back to you, could you talk a little bit about how this new law may be affecting some of these service companies?
Well, I think that the main important point is what Francisco was mentioning. First of all, we need to sort out the midstream bottleneck. When that midstream bottleneck is removed, I think we would see a big boom in oilfield services. Right now, I would say that the oilfield services company are split in two different situations, whether they service conventional fields or unconventional fields. The conventional fields, they are still not in a very boom that this at the present times. They are still suffering from the coming recession from the previous government, and they are all waiting to see what happens with the conventional fields after the famous Project Andes from YPF. On the other hand, oilfield services company assisting for unconventional fields are receiving a lot of demand and will probably receive much more demand in the coming months and the coming years once the midstream bottleneck is sorted out. We see that it has already started, a lot of bidding processes for high specs rigs, for fracking spreads, the companies sorting out their problems by themselves sometimes, already a few M&A transactions in the sector and a few others to come. So we will see much more activity, but mainly for oilfield services companies addressing the unconventional concessions. That will be it.
Okay, great. Thanks. Thanks, Esteban. Let's move on to the questions from the audience. As mentioned earlier, please submit your questions via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And let us know if you would like for us to direct the questions to any one of the panelists in particular, or any of the moderators. Mariana, what would be our first question?
I see that in the chat, there's a question about the extensions, if they are considered part of the current term of existing concessions. I don't know, Tommy, if you want to take this on.
Yes, sure. Well, I think we mentioned that the law states very clearly that the existing concessions will be ruled by the previous law, right? So if you have a concession today in Vaca Muerta, then you will have the right to apply for an extension, and then after that extension to another extension, and it has no limit to the number of extensions that you can request. That's why I mentioned that the effect on Vaca Muerta is limited because, as you know, most of the acreage is already concessioned. So yes, there's no change, right? The only change would be if you have a conventional concession and you want to apply it for a non-conventional concession. In that case, you only have 35 years. That's all. You cannot apply for an extension of that. And the reason for that is that the law considers that this new unconventional concession is new, right? It doesn't come from a previous title. I don't know if that answers the question, Faustina.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, no, thanks for that, Tomas. Along those lines, some questions regarding the application of for I guess for new projects within the Vaca Muerta is, and I guess the question comes from what sort of ring fencing is the RIGI going to have on these projects? What is defined as a current development versus a new development? Is that something that has been discussed already? Is that going to be part of the reglamentación? Maybe more of a question. Maybe more of a question for you, Mariana.
Well, the specific to the upstream sector, I refer to what Tomas said and about the acreage being already awarded and being under concession. And I think this relates to the SPV questions that we have over there. So what the RIGI establishes is that these projects have to be carried through a special purpose vehicle with a sole specific purpose of dealing with that specific project. So if you were to have more than one project within one vehicle, you would have to either do a spin-off or set up a dedicated branch, which is a sort of a novel figure in the law. That spin-off would be under a tax-free reorganization regime, but you will have to find a way to legally set up an entity that is isolated and only devotes to this specific project that has to qualify, right? So for existing projects, it's a little bit tricky if those are going to be able to qualify because of the need to invest in the development and the acquisition of assets if the assets are already there, you know.
Okay, we have a question that's more focused on oilfield services, and that's how the RIGI will incentivize oilfield service companies to bring in new equipment needed to develop the Vaca Muerta, in particular access to US dollars. And Esteban, I think you may have covered that, but any further details on that?
Well, I think this might be addressed better by Mariana, Tommy, but we are not, we believe that the RIGI was not designed for the upstream. It was more designed for the investments that are not there in Argentina yet, but mainly for infrastructure, midstream, and large investments in other types of energy, you know, not for the upstream in oil and gas. So we don't expect this to happen. The whole RIGI was targeted to new investments that are not here yet. So, but I doubt that they will be able to apply for the RIGI.
Okay, Mariana, any comment, or Tommy, any comment on that?
I agree with what Esteban said.
Yes, although from the upstream perspective, we still have some hope, shall we call it that way, that not exactly the normal development of a field would apply for a RIGI, but probably other kinds of new investment in infrastructure for a field probably could be, but we still we need to wait for the regulation. And I agree with Esteban in that, of course, this is something that the authorities have already said in different venues and meetings, that they understand that this is an incentive scheme or incentive framework that is designed and it is aimed at attracting new investment for projects that wouldn't have been done if it wasn't for the RIGI, right? And the argument is that EU oil and gas investors will do that regardless. Well, yes, but we also have, the possibility of increasing our investments or doing different, or scaling up our investments if we have an incentive, right? So we need to wait for a regulation, but I agree with Esteban, and probably it's not aimed at a normal investment of oil and gas, but we still have to see how it goes.
Okay, great. Mariana, what other questions is there?
Yeah, I see a question addressed to Esteban. They're asking, could you provide your view regarding financing available for projects aiming RIGI?
Well, I think that what is happening at the local market, that the government is crowding itself out of the local market, the credit market, would let available funds to finance the industry. So I'm quite optimistic, not only the local market, but not only the banks, the financial system, but also the capital markets locally would be willing to finance some of these investments. If they are too large, there will be not enough local money, but they could address the multilaterals or address even international markets. But I do expect, and I read another question about if I expect or not the FDI coming, foreign direct investments, and so far the law has not still been regulated, and there has been announcements of already $39 billion led by the Petronas announcement with YPF, but we do expect a lot of FDI coming in, not only because of the RIGI and the basis law, but mainly because of the rock. It all ends up in the rock, in Vaca Muerta. So I know Tommy and Francisco as producer will agree. That's the completely necessary ingredient, and then the other are the sufficient ingredients.
Well, thanks, Esteban. If I could just add, we're seeing quite a bit of additional interest from multilaterals, not only U.S. but some of the Asians that are with this now open to at least considering Argentina, whereas before they had really pushed the country off their radar screen. Question on oil pipelines and LNG, Frank. Oil pipelines seem to be well advanced. What about the gas pipeline infrastructure? And if LNG exports are to begin in 2027, what pipeline will be available to supply that natural gas?
Yeah, I think these are two different stages. The project that PAE announced, that I think it's the one that the question addressed, that is going to be, they're going to build a shorter pipe that connects to the actual infrastructure. It's not that there's going to be new big pipelines coming from Neuquén in order to supply that project. But when we speak about the LNG project, that's something that still need to be figured out, because it does not fit quite right with the RIGI, so it will have its own regime. I think Tomas stated that there's an LNG specifically regime that is going to be arise. It's still not definite. He can tell in more detail, but for that, for sure, there's going to be the need of a new pipeline or a specific pipeline that goes from the fields up to the LNG facilities. you know, but I think it's quite different from what PAE is having in mind.
Yes, yes, thank you, Francisco. One clarification about this, because I spoke about pipelines previously, and I was talking about oil pipelines. When I say authorization, etc., I'm talking about oil pipelines. Regarding gas pipelines, the regulation is different. I'm meaning the central gas pipeline, so the gas pipelines that go from Neuquén to the coast. Those are not changed. The regulation of that gas pipelines is not changed because it's regulated in a different law, in the gas law. So, and then regarding LNG, yes, as Francisco said, the hydrocarbons law, sorry, is in the gas law. The gas law will does have a change specifically for that case, for LNG, right? So it's not changed. The framework is not changed for the natural gas in general, but it changes. It brings a specific regulation for LNG projects, and it says that you can apply for an exploitation authorization of LNG for 30 years, and it will be, and the government will give you a firm authorization for a firm export, right? For 30 years. And that export cannot be affected by internal market requirements, by curtailments for internal supply, all the sort of curtailments and issues that we are used to have in Argentina. So what this specific regulation for LNG aims at is to isolate LNG projects. So, and also, if I'm not mistaken, Mariana, you can correct me on this, I think that there is no third-party access for LNG, this LNG project, right?
Correct.
So it's very special, and you know, and very tailor-made for the LNG industry.
I see a couple of questions that are very legal, but and have a quick answer, which is when do we anticipate that the law will be fully regulated, and also about the role of the provinces within the RIGI scheme. So in terms of regulation, the expectation based on latest public information is that it's going to take another 3 weeks to have it. The decrees and the resolutions from the Secretary of Energy. So we are very eagerly waiting for those. And about provinces, the basis law establishes that or invites the provinces to adhere to the RIGI. So Rio Negro was the one that started this, hopefully this trend of issuing a local law, provincial law, saying that it incorporates all of the RIGI provisions within the provincial legislation. And basically what that means is that the provinces and also the municipalities that also adhere to the RIGI cannot impose new taxes or fees or contributions as the ones existing as of December 31st, 2023. Only municipalities can charge for real services, actual services rendered, but that's the situation.
Well, great. We're just about out of time. Mariana, do you want to close with anything?
No, I just want to give like a general comment here that this has been a great discussion and we just tapped the tip of the iceberg. As you can tell, we are all very eagerly awaiting the regulations that will provide light to several important aspects of the law. And I hope everyone can agree that there are many good ideas in the law and that Argentina is taking steps in the right direction to have a more open economy, support large investments in infrastructure projects, and strengthen the midstream sector. So it's time to make our potential a reality. So that's it from me. Joe?
Well, thanks, Mariana, and thanks very much to Nicholson Cano for its support, and particularly its partner, Nicolas Perkins, who originally suggested this event, as well as to our co-moderator, Mariana, our panelists, Tomas, Esteban, Francisco, They all have very generously contributed their time to share their valuable insights on this important topic. And thanks to our audience for your time and questions. Hopefully you found today's event of interest and relevant to your business. Hope to see you at our Shale in Argentina conference event next month. Y hasta la próxima.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Joe. Bye, everyone.
Ciao.